Just Teen Stress. I'm Abba Shasta, and welcome back to our Beyond the Brain series, where we interview health professionals about mental health in order to get a deeper insight of different aspects of stress and mental health well-being. Today, I'm here with the host of the Mental Health Moment with Dr. Hammond, psychologist and speaker, Dr. Nekeshia Hammond. Can you please start off by telling me a little bit about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you first for having me. Happy to be here. So I'm Dr. Nekeshia Hammond. I'm a psychologist, a speaker, in my professional life, and an author. And on my personal life, I'm a mom and I'm a wife, and I'm an advocate in the community for all things mental health.
So awesome. So as you've done a lot of things. So psychologist, you're executive coach, leading a motivational speaker, the founder of the Hammond Psychology and Associates, and having served as president of the Florida Psychological Association. It seems like you've lived like 100 lives.
It feels like it.
Things with obviously other amazing notable accomplishments. So tell me a little bit about why you do what you do and how do you get into speaking with the emphasis on the topic of mental health?
Yeah, why I do what I do, I really honestly love what I do. I feel like a very blessed person to be able to work in the field of mental health because even though what I've done has shifted over time, I get the opportunity to see so many people thriving, learning how to live healthier lives, learning how to be happier. Like that's I don't know, like just the most amazing thing because I really love seeing people win. And then what happened to me, well, honestly, almost a decade ago, was I started to get more into speaking because I love to be in community. So I love to learn about different groups. I've spoken throughout the world in different communities, meeting different people, learning about their stories, and really learning how strong people are and how resilient we all are because a lot we're just thrown out with a lot of thrown we're a lot of stress is thrown at us is what I'm trying to say, and so it's beautiful also to see how strong people are.
I love that answer. Yeah, very
Mm,
simple but very true. So,
yeah.
can you share your perspective on what you think today's current state of teen mental health and stress is like compared to how you think it was, if it changed, if any, when you were a teenager, especially considering your background in mental health and leadership development?
Yeah, it's definitely changed a lot. It's interesting because the stressors are very different now, so I don't wanna date myself too much, but back when I was a teenager, there was no social media yet. We did have computers. Sometimes my son was like, "Were TVs around?" I'm like, "Yes, I'm not that old." But no, but there was no social media. Cyberbullying wasn't really a thing because we didn't have that. So the world was very different. It's much more digitized now, of course. There's way more demands on time, especially as a teen. When I look back at my teen years, like I don't remember any conversations about mental health, which was definitely not a good thing. It was just more of like, do all these things and achieve all these things, but like, who cares about your mental health? Which definitely leads to burnout and is not recommended. But now I think the positive, even though there's a lot there's a lot of depression and anxiety and all these things now for teens. The positive side of it is we are having more conversations about mental health. So again, thank you for doing this. For example, because we are learning more now how important it is to take care of ourselves, especially in our teen years, which is just a heavy time of stress and trying to figure out life. So there's definitely pros and cons with how the landscape has changed over time when it comes to teen mental health.
And then on the topic of teen mental health, we're talking about coping mechanisms, so how do you think is your coping mechanisms have evolved over time? Is there any that you've kind of taken with you to adulthood, or like any that you completely dropped and you've created new ones, or how do you think that works?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to be very honest. When I was a teen, I did not do well with self-care at all, unfortunately, because I was in a rigorous, like I was in the IB program and I was in all these clubs and I was doing sports and doing all these things in high school. And every focus was like, what's the next? Like, how do you get the best grade? How do you do well in this? How do you do well in that? Which is not a bad thing. But then I didn't really have any true like self-care at the time, and going into college still that mindset, which I would highly not recommend. But over time in my adult years, I really learned the value of self-care. I always tell everyone, whether you're a teenager or adult, how important it is for us to put ourselves first. So even though it sounds selfish, it's so important. So that's my motto now, and that's actually something I teach in a lot of different communities. But it's so important to really be checking in with ourselves, putting ourselves first, making sure that we have some type of self care plan to not only deal with the current stress, but to build ourselves up for what life is just going to throw at us. So it's definitely evolved over time, in a positive way, when it comes to self care.
So, how do you think that the principles of mental resilience and personal growth can be applied to addressing the specific challenges that teenagers face in today's society?
Yeah, that's another great question. So really, it starts with having a mindset and understanding that personal growth is like vital. So whatever path you choose as a teen, whether you choose to after, high school, let's say go into the military, whether you choose to go to college, become an entrepreneur, like whatever path it is, or a combination of those things, you have to constantly be having personal growth along the way, and that looks different for everyone. And I will say for me personally, I still do this to this day. I didn't do that as a teenager because I didn't know better at the time, but to this day it's like, okay, what can I do to be better? Right. So for me right now, like it's reading, it's spending time in nature, it's meditating, like I have the whole list of things. But even as a teenager, you can start to do those things too. All of us have different interests. Right. So if you like biking, if you like swimming, walking, running, whatever it is physically, how do you get better emotionally? How do you get better spiritually and mentally? Like really taking the time to think about that. And then whatever those answers are, if you're, let's say, 16 years old, the answers are going to be different if you're 26 or 36 or whatever age. So taking the time to continually check in with yourself to build your personal growth, again, for you to be able to handle life emotionally, but also mentally, physically, and spiritually. Like all those parts of yourself are very important. But it really starts with making the commitment to your own personal growth.
And then, as a speaker, something that you talk about is work-life balance, which is often associated with professionals or adults. So, how can that concept be adapted to help teenagers manage their academic, social, and personal lives in a balanced way?
Yeah, and it is so great. I'm so glad you asked that question because it's so important to start early. Like teen years are important too. So again, I share transparently, I did not have a lot of balance as a teenager at all. I wish I did. Looking back now, like it was just there were so many things that I had on my plate, but having that balance early, so making sure not only are you spending time with your schoolwork, but are you spending time with your friends? Are you spending time with your family? Are you doing things that you enjoy? Like, are you giving yourself a little bit of downtime? I know the world is hectic right now and busy, and we have all these demands and cell phones, and we have, computers and all these things that we feel like we have to be doing. TikTok, fill in the blank, right? We have a lot of time that we spend on those things, which are okay, but also, are you taking the time to take care of yourself? Even as a teenager, that's what starts the process of looking at being more balanced, having more wholeness, making sure that different areas of your life are where they need to be at instead of spending a large amount of time in one area and neglecting the others. So it's really, again, taking the time to really assess, like, okay, here's these different areas of my life, and how can I make sure for me, because balance looks different depending on the person, that for me this makes sense and I'm functioning in a healthy way.
So aside from all the things that you've done that we talked about a little bit earlier, you introduced us as saying that you're also a mother. So what role do you think that parents play in supporting the mental health of their teenagers, and how do you think that they can open up that conversation about mental well-being?
Yeah, great. Um, Great question again. So when it comes to parenthood, it's really important to start even before the teen years. So I'm a little biased because I do work as a psychologist, obviously, and have a mental health background. So even when my son was in preschool, we were already having conversations about self care, obviously at an age appropriate level, and we were having conversations about his well being. We have a lot of heart to heart conversations, especially on car rides to school now that he's in middle school. But really, parents absolutely have a responsibility not just for the physical safety of a child, but their psychological safety, like emotionally and mentally. How are they doing? Are we checking in as parents the best we can? Are we doing our best to give them the best resources? For some kids, it's therapy, or teens, it's therapy. For some teens, it's medication. For some teens, it's a group. For some teens, mentorship, friendships, extracurricular activities. Like, it looks different depending on the teen, but it's really important for parents to be assessing also, like, what else can I do to help this child? What resources, community resources are around if it's just too overwhelming, which is okay. And what can I do also at home to make sure that I'm putting this child in the most supportive environment possible? So there's a lot that parents can do, and we absolutely have a responsibility of that.
And then something you were talking about when we're talking about the work-life balance, that something that's arisen in this new generation in our society today is technology. So, with your appearances on many different major platforms, how do you think that media coverage shaped your approach to addressing mental health on a broader scale, especially for that younger audience?
Yeah, it's definitely pros and cons. So one of the pros of so much media and social media is, what I love to see is, honestly, like, people with major influencers and celebrities and things of that nature who are saying, like, hey, I went to therapy, I had depression, or I had anxiety, or I had whatever they had, like different mental health issues, and I am seeking help for those things. Like, that's a huge deal. Very exciting thing, because for us as a community, but especially the larger influencers, to be sharing their stories, to be saying to teens, like, hey, like, even if it's a fellow, major teen influencer, hey, I have issues too, and I sought help. I got help in this form, right? I'm trying to work on my well being. I'm trying to work on my balance, if you will. I'm trying to work on meditating, or all the different really cool, neat things for coping is a great thing. Of course, on the other end of it, on the not so great side, I mean, it goes both ways with anything, but with technology, there's also a lot of information, especially, well, I won't say which platform, but certain platforms share a lot of negative, like, false information when it comes to mental health. Like, if you just do this, you're magically going to be cured of depression, which is not at all true. So there's a lot of false information too, unfortunately, targeted at teens and young adults when it comes to mental health, and all, yeah, all sorts of myths, which we're trying on the mental health side, and on the mental health professional side, to make sure we're sharing the accurate information to hopefully outweigh some of the negative myths that are out there about mental health. But I think overall, there's just on a positive note, there's an opportunity again for technology to do us good also, by sharing the positive stories and the kindness and the compassion, and look what I'm doing to help someone else. Like, those types of stories are really important when it comes to mental health.
And then talking about like myths, what do you think is the biggest misconception about mental health?
The biggest misconception that I've seen is that people think that mental health looks a certain way, and it's so not true. Well, two myths. One is, it looks a certain way. So, like, let's say depression. It's like, well, this teenager can't go to school, they're in bed, they're not able to do anything, they're failing everything, like, they're depressed. And it's like, well, yeah, maybe for that person. But then there's teenagers that go to school every single day, that smile, that have friends, and they're feeling depressed too. But they're not saying anything necessarily, because the stigma of mental health, or for whatever other reason. And the second thing that I see, or I hear constantly, because people tell me in conversations, is that they fake things online. Like, they just put this lifestyle out there because they're embarrassed of showing the truth about their life. I mean, teenagers and adults really have told me, and they've said that. They're like, I don't want people to know that I'm depressed, that I'm sad, that I've had this loss, or whatever I'm going through. So I just pretend like everything is perfect on my social media platforms. And then no one asks any questions, and I can just pretend that everything's okay. So those are yeah, two really common things when it comes to mental health that we don't always understand. It's like people have said sometimes it's an invisible disability. Like you can't always see what this person's going through.
And then kind of like a personal interest question. So,
Yeah.
as a senior right now and I'm going into college, so I was thinking of minoring in psychology. As a psychologist yourself, why did you decide to go into the realm of psychology?
Yeah, I love helping people. When I first started out, I so this month is actually my 15th year in private practice. It feels like just yesterday. So it my path has looked a lot different, but from the start in college, when I decided, okay, I want to be a psychologist, my first interest was like, how can I help youth? How can I help children and families? When I first started, the beginning of my career, I did a little bit of therapy for a couple years, and then I switched into psychological evaluations, and then it switched again into more speaking to different communities and a little bit of work in the office. So it's changed over time, and working with the media, so it's changed over time. But the biggest thing I would say is the opportunity to help someone was like a huge motivator for me, because especially with kids, I knew that if I were able to reach kids early on, and kids and teens early on, like it could literally change their entire life. There's 80-year-olds out there that are really struggling from something that happened in their youth, but they never got the treatment, they never had anyone to process trauma or whatever it was, so they lived their whole lives really struggling with depression or anxiety and things like that from something that happened like, you know, 70 years ago. If they're 80 years old, like I've seen it happen many times, and it's hard and it's sad. So I knew early intervention was so important. So that was my motivation when I first started out. Like, okay, how can I help so that I can not only just change this child or teen's, childhood or teen years, but like potentially change their entire life. So that was pretty exciting for me.
And then my last question is,
Yeah.
what like kind of advice would you give to someone out there that's struggling with their mental health, or just some kind of message that you would like to leave for our Just Teen Stress audience?
Yeah. So if you are struggling with your mental health, especially as a teen, I would definitely say to, first of all, put yourself first and understand that your mental health is very important. There's a ton of people who probably care about you, who you may or may not know about or be aware of, but there is absolutely hope. There's a lot of people who want to help others. I've witnessed that meeting tons of people around the world. Like there's a lot of good people in the world, even though sometimes social media shows us a different picture. There's a lot of good people that would want to help you. So whether that's help from your parents, or whether it's help from your sibling or your best friend or teacher, whomever it is, like there's a lot of people, or if it's a mental health professional, whomever it is, there's a lot of people who want to help you. So make sure to reach out in that way. And also, there's also a lot of different self-care things to do as well, like doing things you like and doing things you enjoy, to the best of your abilities, to do your best to be in the most peaceful state. Make sure you're resetting, recharging, because mental health is really really critical, really really important. So I would say putting those things into place, and also again knowing there's a lot of hope out there.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Hammond, for
You're
telling
welcome.
us about mental health and your experience with it throughout your professional career and your thoughts and opinions. It was very inspiring for me, and I know it'd be very inspiring for anyone else who watches this. Yeah, thank you so much for helping us address teen stress.